again, we're back in the book Researches into the Lost Histories of America, or the zodiac shown to be an old terrestrial map in which the Atlantic isle is delineated so that light can be thrown upon the obscure histories of the earthworks and ruined cities of America. This is by W.S. Blackett, again from 1884. So we're going to continue where we left off in the last part, and we're going to start in chapter 12 today. It says here the tidings, page 121. The ethnology of Mexico and the surrounding countries found to be in accordance with the pedigree of Titan. In the fifth chapter, the Titan giants have been treated as a general equivalent for the Oceanides. In the cosmogony of Sanko Nyaton, they acquire more limited localization. By Astarte, Kronos had 7 daughters called Titanides. To Sidic, who was called just one of the Titanides, bore Asclepius. In this work, it will be satisfactorily proved that Asclepius is the Mexican god Teculipoca. So Asclepius we have associated with Hermes and Thoth, if you guys remember, in name and nature. So that is the Mexican Tezculipoca. This fact suggests an inquiry into the ethnology of Mexico to see if there is any resemblance between the races of the country and the ancient Greek pedigree of Titan. So remember what he's saying here is, you know how they got the Greek mythology and they got the Titans? Well, he's telling you this pedigree, these people's real lineage, these might be in Mexico. There is no part of the Greek mythology more important and less ambiguous than that family, so that it is possible to make a fair comparison between the descendants of Titan and the known inhabitants of Mexico and Central America. This process is the strongest possible test of identity. Long ages have intervened between the composition of classical myths and the present day, so that there can be no suspicion of forgery or unfairness in the comparison. If, therefore, it should be found that the actual ethnology of America agrees with the pedigree of Titan, the identity will be established irrefragably. The following is the pedigree of Titan. So they start with Oelus or Coelus and Terra, Ocealus or Terra. Then it's Titan. Then you got Japetus. Then you got Prometheus under him, Epimetheus, Menoetius, and Atlas. Atlas, coming from the Titans, right? Then from the Atlas, you get Maya, and from Prometheus, Deucalion, who marries Pyrrha. This has to be compared with the actual ethnology of Mexico and Central America and the statements of travelers concerning the races of men found in that land. The most convenient book for making this comparison is Adelung's Mithridates, a German work containing the languages of all the world, studied by means of the Paternoster. The advantage of this work for the purpose consists in its giving the ethnology of the country, checked by philology. It will be observed that Titan is the stepfather of the family. Supposing, therefore, that the theory is correct, which puts the Titans in Mexico or thereabouts, there ought to be some race of that name in the land. This requirement is met exactly in Adelung's description of the races. He says that the Totonaques, all right, Totonaques were the oldest inhabitants of Anahuac, right, ancient Mexico, central Mexico. The Totonaques are situated about Veracruz, and they were formerly on the seacoast of Texcoco. All right, these are also sites or places where the Olmec, some of the oldest sites of the Olmec also came out of. They had a mythology comprised of 2 kinds, one of men of offerers and one of the flower offerers, in which the last prevailed. The language consists of 4 dialects. In this extract, there is a surprising agreement with the Greek pedigree, now under consideration. Titan is found in the Totonaques. Here, Titan and Toton, Titan or Toton, are the same. All right, it's the same. Listen up. A most surprising circumstance at this great distance of time. It might be discredited were it not known fact that language, and names have more tenacity than bricks and mortar. But Adelung expressly says that the race is the oldest in Anahuac, and it must have been very ancient to have divided itself into 4 dialects. This nominal agreement cannot be accidental, because Typhoon, who delineates the country of the Totonaquis, is one of the Titans. You hear that? Dropping down the pedigree, it will be seen that the son of Titan is Japetus, so that there ought to be some race in Mexico and Central America that answers to that personage, as the Greeks are said to have looked upon Japetus as the father of all mankind, Japetus, and as in other myths, he is son of Coelus and Terra, parents of the giants. The required race ought to be prominent and widespread. These conditions are well fulfilled in the Zapotecs Japetus, in which the name of Japetus is found exactly. Adelon says in the east are the Zapotecs bordering the Talasca and Guatemala. In the traditionary histories of the country, they are found at Quiché, the Quiché Maya. The Zapotecs are said to be identical with the Toltecs, the civilizers of the land. M. Dupoix, Monsieur Dupoix, the French traveler. We read his account. We're going to get a review of that soon. Again, what he found in Palenque. An artist has given the best account of the Zapotecs. He has made it plain that the Zapotecs are older than the Mexicans. They were the artists of the country and famous for sepulchral tumuli, or mounds. Nothing can be more complete than this identification, and nothing can be more material to the elucidation of Mexican antiquities, because the Toltecs here, identical with Japetus, were the builders of the great edifices and wondrous temples now in ruins. In the present pedigree, Japetus is the father of 4 sons. Let them be taken separately. Prometheus stands first. In another chapter, it will be satisfactorily proved that Prometheus stands for Mexico itself. You guys heard that? The syllable pro is evidently an affix. When it is thrown away, the remaining word is the native name of the Mexicans. Says Meteus. Adelung writes the word Mixteca, and he puts the Mixtecas southeast of modern Mexico. He observes that the Mexicaned call themselves Aztecan. The terminations are German in both instances. Prometheus in Greek mythology is tied to the Caucasus. When the histories of Asia get studied in the light of poetical astronomy, it will be found that the teaching is correct. The histories of Mexico transfer themselves bodily to the Caucasus. The next son of Japetus is Epimetheus. In an ethnological point of view, there is no difference between Prometheus and Epimetheus. Like pro, the syllable epi must be thrown away as affix. There is the same distinction between the 2 Mexicos at the present day. Mexico is divided into Upper and Lower Mexico. Upper and Lower Egypt, Oh, Upper and Lower, In the history of the Atlantis, Pandora, the Great Mother, marries Hyperion. In the Greek myth, she marries Epimetheus. There is nothing to show whether there is any difference between the 2, but certainly the great ruins of the land are discovered in the northern parts of Mexico. In the present comparison, Prometheus and Epimetheus equally stand for the Mexicans, or Mexicans. This identification of the 2 eldest sons of Japetus makes the Aztecs or Mexicans to spring out of the older or generic race of the Zapotecs. Atlas may be mentioned next. This is exceedingly plain. Atlas and the Aztlans answer to one another in name and nature. Atlas is the mythic astronomer, and the Aztlans the real astronomers of the Atlantic Isle. The Aztlans were found in Mexico, but according to a well-known native picture, they seem to have originally migrated from somewhere else. In another chapter, Atala in the mountains of Quiché. Atala is a real place. If you add the tis at the end, what you get? Atlantis. In the mountains of the Quiché or Guatemala, Yucatan area will appear to have been the central location of the kingdom of Atlas. All right, and the name will be found stamped upon the nomenclature and race of the region and Central America proper, appearing to justify the language of Sicilian mythology, which makes Atlas to occupy the center of the isle. The classic myth puts Atlas in northwestern Africa. There is no objection whatever to that allocation. It is a part of the mythic life of Atlas. The Aslans bring their astronomy across the Atlantic Ocean. He said, no problem. That's just a colony. That's because the Aztlans brought it over there. You heard? That's what literally he just said. They brought their astronomy across the Atlantic Ocean. And this pedigree, Atlas, has a son called Maya. And Maya is the mother of who? Gautama, Buddha, Turned into ethnology, Maya is even plainer than that of Atlas and his brothers. Adelon places the Mayas in Tabasco and Yucatan. He says that perhaps the Mayas' speech could be understood over the Great Antilles. At the present day, Maya is the name of the inhabitants of Yucatan and other adjoining provinces. The descendants of Atlas are the Atlantides, who are spoken of as the Pleiades. There can be little doubt that these Atlantides, of whom Maya is one, represent 7 provinces in Central America. So Maya is one, and they represent 7 provinces, in Central America. If the Mayas are one of these sisters, they were placed in the most convenient situation for the passage of the Atlantic Ocean into the Old Hemisphere. Prometheus in this cosmogony has a son by name Deucalion, and he ought also to be among the races that inhabited the western shores of America. For although he is a navigator and visits other quarters of the globe, yet the harbor from which he sails must have been in the land of the Titans. It is pretty plain that the name of Deucalion must be treated in the same way as Prometheus. The first syllable must be thrown away to get at the real ethnology of the character. So treated, it is Calion, almost if not the exact name given to Cortes and his companions by the natives of Mexico as their native name. The only remaining son of Japetus is Minoetius. This personage unfortunately has no myth with that spelling, and he does not appear to be connected with Mexico and Central America, either by tradition or ethnology. But the myth of Minos assists the student to understand him. Minos was the father of Androgeus, Glaucus, and Deucalion, besides 2 daughters, Phoedra and Ariadne. The mythology of Minos is very plain. In the latter parts of this work, he will be found located in Peru, so that one has to look to South America for the ethnology of Minoetius. Adelon puts the Mainas upon the upper waters of the Amazon. He says the Romainas and the Mainas speak the same dialect. You guys hear that? Romi, Romani, Romanis, Romani, Mainas, who's the gypsies, ending up in Scotland and the British Isles, remember, coming from the real Egypt. Specimens of their language are given, which in a marvelous manner exhibit some mysterious connection with Europe. All right, some mysterious connection with Europe. On the whole, it would be very difficult to deny that the pedigree of Titan, compared with the real ethnology of Mexico and Central America, exhibits a very close resemblance. It is sufficiently close to create the theory that the myths of the Greeks concerning the family of Titan are really derived from the real histories of this part of America. All right, and that was chapter 12. We're going to definitely proceed right now onto chapter 13. Again, we're still in the book Researches into the Lost Histories of America. And we continue chapter 13. It says here, Mexico, number 1. Mexico is the great dragon of the ancient world. The great dragon, the plump serpent, the great dragon, the sign of the serpent and its mythology. Perhaps in all the transformations which the classic writers have handed down to posterity to preserve a record of old histories, there is none so striking or so well composed as the following. It may be called the master myth of antiquity. Taurus, Draconum genuit et taurum Draco. The bull begat the dragon, and the dragon the bull. The elucidation of the first part of this mysterious line has been adduced by the concealed histories traced in the foregoing pages. The bull mentioned in the Japanese bull, a picture of which has been given at page 85, ripping up the egg of the world. The outcome of that act was the production of the dragon. The mingling of the blood of the Asiatic races with those of the Western America created the dragon, or at least entered into its constitution. The complement of the classic line will receive its elucidation when the subject passes from Central America. It is this dragon which now awaits attention. The discovery of Mexico and its conquest by the Spaniards was one of the most remarkable incidents in modern history. It took the world by surprise and revealed the circumstance which Europeans were very slow to believe, that there were other portions of the habitable globe, besides their own, in possession of civilization and social institutions. The account and description of the country, its people, and its religious customs seemed incredible. Europe asked with astonishment for some explanation of the mystery. One had a right to inquire of the learned who and what these people were. Was there any account of them in ancient literature which could throw light upon their histories? All right, this is what we're talking about. And it's in the mythology, guys. They were talking about ancient Americas the whole time. But the inquiring world got no reply, nor has it done so to this day. It is proposed now to show that the country was not only well known in ancient times, but that the traditions and histories connected with it were all down in the common school books of Europe. That in short, it was the dragon of the ancient world. All right, America, this part of this region, Central Mexico, Central America, the dragon of the ancient world. All right, that dragon of the ancient world, Dracan, stand up. Before the draconic myths are introduced, it may be necessary to collect a few particulars concerning the country and its institutions. Brazur de Bourbourg is good authority to consult. Before the Olmeques, the region was occupied by the Kinamis, or giants. You guys hear that? So again, before the so-called Olmecs, right? The region was occupied by the Quinamis, or giants, and Tlaloc was one of their divinities, with the Olmeques were the Totanakis and Otomis. The name of the ancient city of the gods was Teotihuacan, which was founded by the Totonakis. This city was more anciently called Veitihuacan. That almost sounds like Vatican. You see that? Veotihuacan. Quetzalcoatl is at the head of the Toltec race, which race is caused by Nahuas. But this deity had no idols. All right? This deity had no idols. Jehoshua. He introduced monasteries. To him was erected the vast pyramid of Cholula, the base of which was twice as great as that of Cheops in Egypt, all right, bigger than the ones in Egypt. Mention is also made of pyramids of the sun and moon in the center of the plain. Somewhat inconsistently with this description of Quetzalcoatl, it is said that he set up a new Toltec state in Huetzecapan, Puebla de los Angelos, all right, the pueblos of Los Angeles, all right. So remember, Quetzalcoatl, a real person, setting up towns, founding towns. Near it was the mountain of Tlaloc, and a statue to that idol. More inconsistently still, there is an account of a temple erected by Quetzalcoatl which was circular, and the entrance represented the throat of a serpent, which filled with fright those who approached it for the first time. A few more particulars may be gleaned from other sources. The proper name of Mexico was Anahuac. The state of civilization among the Mexicans, when they were first known to the Spaniards, was much superior to that of the Spaniards themselves. Again, all right, big drop right there. The state of civilization among the Mexicans, when they were first known to the Spaniards, was much superior to that of the Spaniards themselves, okay? When they were first known to the Phoenicians. Ha! The ancient Mexicans had more fire and were more sensible to the impression of honor, more intemperate, and more industrious than those of modern times, but they were at the same time more superstitious and cruel. Perhaps the best idea that can be got of Mexico is what is said of Moctezuma. All his palaces were surrounded with pleasant gardens, in which was every kind of beautiful flower, odoriferous herb, and medicinal plant. It had likewise woods enclosed by walls and furnished with variety of game, in which he frequently sported. And one of the royal buildings was an armory filled with all kinds of offensive and defensive arms, and he employed a number of artificers in manufacturing these, and also artists such as goldsmiths, mosaic workmen, sculptors, painters, and others. All right, you hear everything that's going on when the Europeans came here in Mexico. One whole district consisted solely of dancing masters who were trained up to entertain him. All right. Of one emperor, it is said that during his time the power and wealth of the crown had arrived at such a height that he undertook to construct a temple to the tutelary god of the nation, which was to have surpassed in magnificence all the temples of that country. He had prepared a vast quantity of materials for this purpose, and had actually begun the structure when death interrupted his projects. His successor completed the temple. This work was diligently prosecuted for 4 years, and on occasion of its consecration, he is said to have sacrificed 72,344 persons. The Mexican temples, or teocallis, pyramids, houses of God, as they were called, houses of God, were very numerous. There were several hundreds in each of the principal cities. All right, several hundreds, not just three, several hundreds in each city. They were solid masses of earth, cased with brick or stone, and in their form somewhat resembled the pyramidal structures of ancient Egypt. The bases of many of them were more than 100 feet square, and they towered to a still greater height. They were distributed into 4 or 5 stories, each of smaller dimensions than that before. The ascent was by a flight of steps at an angle of the pyramid on the outside. This led to a sort of terrace or gallery at the base of the second story, which passed quite round the building, to another flight of steps, commencing also the same angle as the preceding, and directly over it, leading to a similar terrace, so that one had to make the circuit of the temple several times before reaching the summit. The top was a broad area on which were erected 2 towers, 40 or 50 feet high, the sanctuaries in which stood the sacred images of the presiding deities. Before these towers stood the dreadful stone of sacrifice, and 2 lofty towers on which fires were kept, and extinguishable as those in the temple of Vesta, so you couldn't turn them off. The description of the sacrifice is too terrific for transcription. A picture of the scene is given in the chapter on Vishnu, page 65. One detestable feature of the Aztec superstition was its cannibalism, though in truth the Mexicans were not cannibals. In the common acceptation of the term, they did not feast on human flesh merely to gratify a brutish passion, but in obedience to their religion. Their repasts were made of the victims whose blood had been poured out of the altar of sacrifice, right? So remember, the Aztecs had just recently come into this area. They weren't the ancient people there, and not always sacrifices. Here is the great dragon of the ancient world. All right? Here is the great dragon of the ancient world. It is true that the foregoing extracts are a description of modern Mexico when discovered by the Spaniards, but it requires only a slight acquaintance with the literature of ancient nations to recognize in the description the dragon of traditionary history. This horrible creature must have been known to all the people of the old world, for it is more largely mentioned and delineated in pictures than anything which has come down to modern times. All right, the dragon, right? The dragon. We're talking about this was the thing of America in the old world. The dragon was the symbol of the old world. As an illustration of these observations, it may be mentioned that in the classics there is a myth of Draco, or something which looks very much like one, a celebrated lawgiver of Athens. When he exercised the office of archon, he made a code of laws for the use of his citizens, which on account of their severity were said to be written in letters of blood. By them, idleness was punished with as much severity as murder, and death was denounced against the one as well as the other. Such a code of rigorous laws gave occasion to a certain Athenian to ask of the legislator why he was so severe in his institutions, and Draco gave for answer that as the smallest transgressions had appeared To him, the servant deaf, he could not find any punishment more rigorous for more atrocious crimes. This may be real history, perhaps it is. It looks a good deal more like Montezuma than an Athenian lawgiver. All right, this is what he's saying. They're actually might be talking about, you know, and he's like an Athenian, like a Greek Athenian lawgiver, for it is said of him that he was inexorable in punishing those who resisted his orders or transgressed the laws of the kingdom. He was an implacable enemy to idleness, every species of which he restrained or corrected. But if he be historical, it only shows that the great dragon has saturated the human mind with principles of rigor, cruelty, and blood. All right, that's the hijack. Much of the most vigorous and graphic description of the great dragon is found in the 12th chapter of the book of Revelations. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and painted to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world, and he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. This remarkable passage of Scripture is singularly in accord with the mythic traces of the present work, and it discloses much which must have had relation to Mexico at times of high antiquity. It will be observed that the passage is zodiacal. It is based upon the Ptolemaic zodiac. The dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. Here the dragon is the serpent of the present map. In the modern zodiac, the serpent has only 1 crown, but there is reason to suspect that older copies of the spears and more crowns. The Sesha serpent, so often referred to in this treatise, has 7 heads, and in the picture given at that serpent at page 60, Brahma has 4 crowns, and he springs from the navel of Vishnu, who reposes on the serpent. Then again, the dragon sweeps the third part of the stars of heaven. This reference to the stars shows that the writer is drawing his imagery from the zodiac. The constellations, which in this work are localized over America, compose about that proportion of the whole starry heaven. America itself is about 1/3 of the terrestrial globe. The passage now under review may be adduced as a very distinct proof of the theory adduced in former pages from the traces of poetical astronomy, and it also fixes with minuteness the present allocation of the great red dragon. So again, this is from the New Testament, right? Not the Torah. The subjects of the women clothed with the sun and having the moon under her feet is one of great obscurity, as it is commonly read, but in its present relation it receives not a little elucidation. It happens to come up as the very next subject which presents itself in this study of the dragon. In the cosmogony of Sanconiaton, Hyperion is the impersonation of the monster. Hyperion may be taken to be the embodiment of ancient Mexico as the great dragon of the world. The present portrait of him gives a lively conception of the notions entertained of old concerning that mysterious land. He, in this picture, is drawn black to make him horrid. He is surmounted with the seething pot crown as the king of hell. He sits upon the great iron fit emblem of the cruel practices of the country. In one hand he clenches a serpent, and he has a bow and arrow in the other. All right, a bow and arrow. He has 9 horrid heads, in which he differs slightly from the representation of the Sesha serpent, with which he corresponds, and in which has but 7. This picture is taken from Dr. Clarke's valuable book of travels, all right? Hyperion, just like almost what they're describing in Revelation, is what he's trying to show. The myth of Hyperion in the classics is limited to this relationship. Hyperion, a son of Coelus and Terra, who married Thea, by whom he had Aurora, and the sun and moon. Aurora had the sun and moon. Hyperion is often taken by the poets for the sun itself. Much the best idea of what the ancients mean by Hyperion is gained from the Atlantis of Diodorus Siculus, already presented to the reader. That author makes Pandora marry her brother Hyperion, and they together have Helio and Selene, otherwise called the sun and moon. The historian then says that Hyperion arrogated to himself universal dominion. This can readily be believed from the manifest greatness of the Mexican Empire, when discovered by the Spaniards under Cortes, as well as the astonishing ruins it has left. It would seem, however, that the great power of Hyperion excited the envy of his family, who became afraid that he would assume the whole kingdom. They, therefore, conspired against him and assassinated him, and they drowned Helio and Eridanus. This is not a bad description of what may be taken to be an epitome of the Asiatic colonies in what may be called Mexico. Now, they calling it Asiatics because they're still trying to say people came here and created these antediluvian people, but they can't even say where from they came in Asia. This is major Asia. All right, try to catch up on the previous videos. This is India Superior. This is the farthest east. This is the true old world. So he's letting you know right here. They're really talking about that description, what they're saying, that Greek legend, myth, they're talking about Mexico. Hyperion is a brother of Oceanus with varying pedigrees. The mingling of the Asiatic and American people leads to the formation of a powerful state, which in process of time suffers from intestine commotion, issuing in the end in the dismemberment of the empire and the flight of some portion of the people into Egypt or into bondage, into Tamari. The histories and events which must have filled up the period of time between the marriage of Pandora and Hyperion and the flight of Helio, or his drowning in the Nile, in the Mississippi, or in the Atlantic is obscure, but there were numerous traditions that supply a large number of particulars, the most prominent of which will be noticed in this and the following chapters. The traditionary history of the country, as published by Brasil de Bourbourg, furnishes the native resemblance of the same facts. The most curious thing in the myth of Hyperion is his family. He is father of Aurora and the sun and moon, or he is the sun itself. As the sun was worshipped in Mexico as the second god of the empire, it might be supposed that Hyperion's parentage of the sun and moon is drawn from the natural phenomena of those orbs. But the story is against that supposition inasmuch as Hyperion is slain, Helio is drowned in Egypt, and Selene wanders over the earth. It must be symbolic ethnology. It would seem that the fancy of the ancients in making the great dragon and his wife to be the parents of the sun and moon is in a sense correct and true. The sun rays of Asia and settling upon the western shores of America. This is his theory when they're trying to say they came here, but they're seeing it in reverse. Just picture it in reverse. In a land of barbarian philosophers, has created for succeeding ages, and in other lands a god and a goddess with the solar and lunar emblems. In Europe it was Apollo and Diana, or perhaps more accurately, Phoebus and Phoebe. In Phoenicia and the Orient it was Baal and Astarte, or Ashtoreth. It is not to be denied that the demon sun and moon have constituted a practical religion for many nations. This fact is well illustrated by one of the Abraxas gems or amulets scattered so widely over Europe and Western Asia, and retained long among the early Christians who found it difficult to throw away their old pagan amulets. The present is the most common form of the Abraxas gem, and there can be no mistake about its signification as both the symbolism and the inscription explain it. It is called Iao, that is to say, Eov, and it has the inscription, the sun spread abroad. The component parts of the figure show that belongs to ancient Mexico. All right, this belongs to ancient Mexico. You see the bird man, like in the mounds as well. It is a bird man. All right, a bird man, like I just said, a bird man, a composition so common in Mexican pictures as to be characteristic of them. The serpent legs localize the figure in the serpent land. The figure of the typhoon in the Coptic zodiac is drawn in the same manner. Typhoon in the Egyptian system is the dragon's son. He is Helios himself. In the following collation of extracts concerning him, he is so called. The picture is in the Coptic zodiac itself, delineating Mexico and called Regnum Typhonis. It is at page 73. Plutarch says the Egyptians esteemed Typhoon as no other than Helios, the chief deity. He burst into life obliquely through the side of his mother. Brian, the head of the Typhonian monster, is found on vases brought as part of the tribute from Asia to the kings of the 18th dynasty. It is something like a Medusa's head. Wilkinson, Typhoon is the son of Earth and chief of the darkness, and takes the form of a serpent. His seat is in the scorpion, over which sign he triumphs. He is red. He is the bad genius. He cuts the body of Osiris into 14 pieces. Dupua. Typhoon is son of Hera. Along had 100 fiery dragons' heads. He tried to rule gods and men, but Zeus bound him and cast him into Tartary. By Echidna he begot the dog Orthodos, Cerberus, the Chimare, and the Harpies, Apollodorus. These extracts give a very lively idea of the mysterious histories of ancient Mexico. Again, all these things they were talking about ancient Mexico, is letting you know they show that the aboriginal dragon race must have been visited by Asiatic people. Again, the aboriginal dragon race, the Dracan race cons. They must have been visited by Asiatic. They don't know. Seen it in reverse, by mixing with the natives, we went over there. They had become savage and had turned red. The extracts also show that the Typhonian and dragon race in Mexico must have spread itself into South America and conquered the upper waters of the Amazon. It appears to have been the custom of the ancients to affix particles to the names of places and people. It is these affixes which obscure the histories of olden time. Among the Titans, of whom in fact the present subject treats, there are several affixes of this kind. Prometheus, Epimetheus, and Deucalion are specimens, as the syllables pro and epi are evidently affixes to the name of Meteos. So in all probability the word hyper is an affix in the name Hyperion. This teaching gains color when it is observed that the removal of the affix brings out view a personage of singular importance to an inquiry into the probable histories of Mexico and its surroundings. It has been already pointed out that the name of Ion or Eon is used extensively in old literature for America in general. Okay? All right? Ion or Eon was used as America in general in old literature. It looks a good deal as if the Hyperion, Eon, Eon is America of the classics, where the Aeon of the cosmogony of Sanconiaton in that document, Aeon is put at the top of the races, which by study have been found to be American. All right? They've been talking about the true old world in these old myths the whole time. Eon and Protogonus are the parents in Genus and Genia. Those are the kids who again become the stem fathers of the giants. This makes Eon to be very similar to Hyperion if he does not actually coalesce with him. A picture is here given of Aeon. Let him be examined. He is human being. wound round by serpents. He has the wings which the Phoenician cosmogony assigns to Tatis and Kronos. He holds a staff or rod, and at his feet is the caduceus of Mercury. All right, it's all Thoth. All right, he also holds the key of the lower regions, like Anubis, Thoth, and Anubis, Hermanubis, god of the underworld, or the lower regions. The picture is taken from Millen's extensive collection of mythic personages, where he is said to be analogous to Heracles, or Hercules, or Phanes, or the Orphics. All these suits Hyperion very well. But if the identification is wrong, Eon must be put into Mexico by the emblems which he carries. There is another character among the mythological monuments of antiquity which answers to Eon, and by consequence to Hyperion, the dragon. It is Mithra, and he is a figure of such importance as to make it necessary to study him with more than common care. Perhaps he may throw light upon the obscure histories of Mexico. A picture is here given of him. Let the image of Mithra be examined and compared with that of Eon. Here it must be admitted that the two figures bear great resemblance. They are both human beings wound round with serpents. They both hold the key of the lower world, and they both have wings. Yet there are some differences, and Mithra, in this picture, has the four wings, which the cosmogony of Sankoniaton assigns to the god Tautis, while Eon has only two. Both Mithra and Eon, all right, and here's some diagrams real quick. All right, both Mithra and Eon have lions' heads, but that can be accounted for, as Mithra was known to European authors and sculptors as a Persian god. This study leads to the conclusion that Eon and Mithra are the same characters. When carried back to their original home, all right, we're just talking about phantoms and duplicates, guys. At the side of Mithra, another picture is here given of the great war god of the Mexicans, Huitzilopochtli. It is for comparison. Let the two figures be examined. It cannot be denied that the two images, as they appear at first sight, are very much alike. They both stand upon the globe, a position very uncommon for the gods of the old world. All right, this is what they're talking about, guys. This is from Mexico, and this is so one of them is from Mexico, one is ancient Greek. All right, Huitzilopochtli, this is from Mexico. It's the same thing they're saying. Look at it. The globes are also put upon pedestals, which are very much alike. The Mexican globe and pedestal are adorned with the barbarous paraphernalia peculiar to half-civilized people. But the real resemblance between the figures does not consist in the form of the pictures. That may or may not be accidental, or a mistake of the Spanish artist, who must have copied the Mexican war god. The identity of the two gods consists in the symbols by which they are distinguished. They are both of them represented as man, bird, serpent, man-bird serpents. Mithra has those peculiarities in a very marked form. They are not so easily distinguishable in the Mexican god, but they are present. He is a man, the bird is upon his head, and he holds the serpent in form of the scepter. Admitting the identity, the question arises which was the original, and that's the thing. They've been seen in reverse this whole time. The original was from here. For the purpose of deducing historical conclusions, a rule has already been laid down that the natural is father to the unnatural. In the present case, the natural is with Huitzilopochtli, the unnatural with Mithra, meaning this is more original. In Mexico, he's letting you know it's more natural than unnatural. It's made up, it's a duplicate, Mithra. The first sits upon a throne, the bird is his ornamental headdress, and the serpent a stick. Under these circumstances, admitting an identity, Mithra must be a copy of Huitzilopochtli. Like I said, duplicates, phantoms and duplicates, a copy. They just copied America. These are just phantoms and duplicates, guys. Hence, it would follow that the Persian deity, for such is the status of Mithra, is a resemblance of a deified remembrance of ancient Mexico. The conclusion now reached is one that may be challenged. It is contradictory of all common conceptions of ancient Asiatic history. to make the Medes and Persians to have been a race which had crossed the Pacific Ocean and to make them immigrants from Mexico into Iran looks problematical. Listen, who's the real Persians? Who's the Elamites coming out of Elam, coming out of Shem? Elam is a son of Shem, guys. All Semitic people. The Medes and Persians, it would be a problem if they were coming from Mexico into Iran. It looks problematical, but the real histories of the central empires of the Orient need illumination almost as much as those of America itself. You gotta be able to open your mind, empty your cup. The true old world is right here. We went out from here. Yet there is a mode by which this teaching can be tested. If the practices of the Mithraic religion were found to be dissimilar to those of Mexico, it would explode the notion. On the other hand, if they were found to tally, it would be the strongest proof possible of consanguinity and ethnological identity. Let therefore the initiations of the two countries and religions be put into comparison. There is a valuable American work on Freemasonry by A.G. McKay, which can be utilized for this purpose. All right? The author says that in Mexico were mysteries with cruelty and bloodshed. There were long fastings to the initiated in a heightened form. All the terrors and sufferings used in the East were there. They were scourged, wounded, and cauterized. A groan would unfit the initiated to pass the trial. In the temple of Vishli-Pushli, the ceremonies were grandest. They represented the wanderings of the god. The caverns were the path of the dead. The initiated was conducted through the caverns till he came to the lifeless body of a man thrown down from under the high altar. After many horrors, he got to a fissure and out into the open air, when vast multitudes received him as born again. Another higher degree was for priests, and they were symbolic, referring to the deluge and subsequent settlement of their ancestors on the lake of Mexico. This has to be compared with the mysteries of Mitra. The aspirant was purified by water, fire, and fastings. He was then introduced into a cave representing the world, on the walls and roof of which were the celestial signs. He was there baptized and had a mark made on his forehead. He was then presented with a crown on the point of a sword, which he refused, saying, Mitra alone is my crown. He was then anointed with oil and crowned with olive, clothed in enchanted armor for the 7 stages of initiation to be passed. First, he was introduced to a cavern where were the howlings of wild beasts. Second, enveloped in darkness except by lightning. Third, he was hurried to the spot whence the sounds came, and suddenly thrust through a door into a den of wild beasts, where he was attacked by the initiated in the disguise of lions, tigers, hyenas, etc. He was then hurried through the apartment into the second cavern, again shrouded in darkness. Then there was thunder. He then was led through 4 other caverns with the same fright. In the 7th, he came to the light and was introduced to the Archimagus on a throne and surrounded by the dispensers of mysteries. Here secrecy was enforced, and he was made acquainted with sacred words, among which was the infallible name of God, and taught the doctrines and rites of Mithraism, of which the history of creation formed a part. On comparison of these 2 processes of religious initiation, it is quite plain that the Mithric of Persia were imitations of those of Mexico. Those are just imitations. They're just copying traditions, guys, from the true old world, America, tested by the same rule as was applied to the 2 figures of Mitra and Vishli-Pushli. That conclusion is inevitable. The initiations of Mexico were ceremonies to keep up the remembrance of the wanderings of the forefathers of the people, all right? There is a reason, there's specific origin to these ceremonies in America, right? It's not just out of nowhere, guys. See, it's more than just mythology, and it's real people doing it, not just one person like Mitra. So he's just representative of what there was going on in Mexico with the people there. And they were doing this in remembrance of the wanderings of the forefathers of the people. The initiations of Mitra in another land were the same ceremonies, but they have got turned into a religion. Eventually, what happened, guys? It became religion. This is major drop here. Body bag for the illusion, right? This is major drop right here. Hope you enjoying the reading. They turned this into religion. But the lesson to be drawn from the comparison is that the Medes and the Persians must have drawn that religion from Mexico and the great god Vishli. This study has brought out prominently to view that Vishli, the great war god of modern Mexico, is the dragon of the ancient world. All right, is the dragon of the ancient world, of which all the nations of the earth have stood in fear. They feared what? The great dragon, America. All the nations, what? They stood in fear of the Amaru Khans. You guys hear this, right? You're reading with me, right? When Mexico was discovered by Cortez and his companions, they came upon the dragon and all the habiliments of fright and horror, which had long ago alarmed the inhabitants of other parts of the earth. He had lost nothing of the cruelty and bloodthirstiness which had characterized him in times of old. According to all appearance, he must have gone from bad to worse and assumed features of malignity, much in excess of those which had rendered him a terror to the world in the mythic ages. If the monster has occupied his den all the time since the Apostle John wrote of him, and has slain his thousands at the same ratio as that mentioned in an extract, where it is said that the victims slaughtered at the dedication of a temple amounted to 70,000, how vast must have been the number of victims of the dragon during all that long period. All right, so now he's going into all comparing it to the so-called devil. So that's when we have to dodge the hijack. When you know languages of the Hebrew, right? When you're tanin, you got tan and tanin. The jackal and dragon is almost said spelled the same way in Hebrew. The real serpent is the jackal. God backwards is dog, right? Dog, the jackal, Anubis. Man's best friend, Sirius, star system, right? What is a seraphim? A seraphim is a fiery flying serpent. That's a dragon, which is an angel. And just like not all angels are good, not all dragons are bad, guys. You gotta know how to dodge the hijack and use discernment. Mr. Prescott in his conquest of Mexico thus describes Vishli, and enumerating the gods, the author says, at the head of all stood the terrible Vishli, the Mexican Mars. Although it is doing injustice to the heroic war god of antiquity to identify him with this sanguinary monster, this was the patron deity of the nation. His fantastic image was loaded with costly ornaments. His temples were the most stately and august of the public edifices, and his altars reeked with the blood of human hecatombs. In every city of the empire, disastrous indeed must have been the influence of such a superstition on the character of the people. There is a tradition in the European collection which seems to belong to this war god, and it may be therefore be transcribed as the embodiment of the ideas which must have floated about in ancient Europe concerning Mexico and its gods. So this is people's interpretation in Europe. It is as follows. All right, listen up. Cacus, a famous robber, son of Vulcan and Medusa. He is represented as a three-headed monster and vomiting flames. He resided in Italy, and the avenues of his cave were covered with human bones. He plundered the neighboring country, and when Hercules returned from the conquest of Derion, Cacus stole some of his cows and dragged them backwards into his cave to prevent discovery. Hercules departed without perceiving the death, but his oxen having lowed were answered by the cows of Cacus, and the hero became acquainted with the loss he had sustained. He ran to the place and attacked Cacus, squeezed and strangled him in his arms, though vomiting fire and smoke. Cacus in this myth is put in Italy, and mention is made of Gedeon, who belongs to Spain, so that the story must relate to the movements of the warlike races that Plato brings into Europe. Listen to what he's saying. Remember, it was the story of Atlantis that these Atlanteans, they had a great army that terrorized all of Europe, and they invaded Europe. So this is what he's saying. He's saying the same people right here must have come from America, This myth, what they were talking about, is a story of the movement of this warlike races that Plato brings into Europe from Atlantis, right from beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Those races comprise the people who came into Europe from beyond the Atlantic. We're just talking about Amaru Khans. But the parentage of Kakus reveals a particular spot in America whence they came. They must have been Mexicans. Kakus is here called the son of Vulcan and Medusa, leaving Vulcan out of the pedigree as rather a general character, hard to localize. This myth makes Kakus to be a Mexican. If he is the son of Medusa, he must have been so. The Gorgons were beyond the ocean in the west. All right, again, the Gorgons were where? Beyond the ocean in the west. All the ancient deities, guys, you never knew were in America. Thus, they were describing them in all the mythology. So that Kakus must have been an American. Kakus was an American. In the following chapter, it will be proved that the Medusa stands for Mexico, so that Kakus must be put there in the first instance. But the myth discloses the den of the dragon. It was covered with human bones. The monster had 3 heads and vomited flames as an evident allusion to the great fire kept always lighted at the summit of the Tecalis. As to the name of Kakus itself, the word is but a different spelling of Gorg or Gorgon, the Gog, and Magog of later histories. Gog and Magog, Kakus answers to the riddle of 666. Huh, that's deep right there. And it says here, the dragon's wife. It seems that this great red dragon had a wife, a beautiful lady, at least in her upper parts. Well, he is not the only monster that has had a beautiful wife. This one's look into. It may turn out instructive. And it says here, Krishna destroying the serpent, his wives, the Nereids, interceding. All right? He's showing you this for a reason because it's going to match what we were just talking about. This picture of the Hindu dragon and his wife shows a glance who this lady was. She turns out to be the mermaid of the ancient world. In the European mythology, the Nereids were nymphs of the sea, daughters of Nereus and Doris. They were 50, according to the greater number of the mythologists. The Nereids were implored as the rest of the deities. They had altars, chiefly on the coast of the sea, where the piety of mankind made offerings of milk and honey, and often of the flesh of goats. When they were on the seashore, they generally resided in grottos and caves, which were adorned with shells. They were subject to the will of Neptune. They are represented as young and handsome virgins sitting on dolphins and holding Neptune's trident in their hands, or sometimes garlands of flowers. They were particularly fond of Alcyone. But who were these wives of the serpent? Must they be considered as natives of the serpent land, or must they be intrusive races who had come into the land and married the great dragon? It is in the power of comparative idolatry to answer that question. Indeed, the description of the Nereides just read supplies an answer. They were subject to the will of Neptune. Who was Neptune? In the Japanese idolatry, the great god of Japan is Amida, a human being with a dog's head, riding a 7-headed horse. This divinity resolves himself into 2 other forms. One is a figure which bears a close resemblance to an European Minerva, and the other is a Nereid. This change of nature reduced to history simply means that the Japanese made a settlement on the west coast of America. All right, again, seeing it in reverse, that doesn't induce that. We probably went over there. They gave existence to a colony, which by its seafaring habits and capacity for navigation has figured in the pictures and traditions of the world as Nereids or mermaids. Again, all happening in America, on the west coast of America. In the Hindu system, Nereus, the father of the Nereids, has a counterpart in the very curious figure of Narayana. Narayana floats upon a leaf. When looked at closely, it can be seen that this personage is in reality Vishnu himself in another name. Without troubling the reader with a dissertation upon this obscure subject, it may be noticed that these characters, Nereus and Narayana, appear to be geographical in Mexico. In any good map of the country, the region is called Nayarit, whether that is to be considered the real name of the land of the Nereid or not. All right, Nayarit, Nayarit. It cannot be denied that it is the same word, Nayarit, Nayarit. If it were so, it would throw great light upon the antiquities of Mexico, as it has just been shown that the Nereids had for a parent a Japanese god, as Japan or Niphon is the Neptune of the old world, and as Poseidon had the Atlantic Isle as his portion, he ought to be found in Mexico. That this god, if he is to be called by that name, had been in the land of the serpent, is a part of the symbolic teaching of the Egyptians, wherein Neph, the Egyptian Neptune, is transformed into a serpent. This figure is too plain for mistake, especially when it is understood that the legs ought to be red. Neph has several other figures to represent him, so that when he appears as a walking snake, it brings Neptune or Poseidon into the Atlantic Isle. One of the names of the Egyptian Neph is Nau. This name is found in Mexico as the Nauhas, Nahuas, Nahuas, Nagas, Nahuas, Nau, serpents who are the Toltecs, the builders and civilizers of the land. But there is another picture which teaches the same doctrine. If the reader will turn once more to the frontispiece of the present work, he cannot fail to notice that the throne of Neptune is supported by the dragon. The god himself is supposed to be behind this curtain, veiled in secrecy, but on the face of the picture, it might be said that the dragon is the god. The scene bears analogy with the Egyptian figure of Neph in form of serpent. From all this, it may be inferred that the wives of the serpent were a very different race from that of the people who embody the dragon. It is certainly very curious to find these young and handsome virgins to be the wives of the dragon, when it is remembered that the women fishes of all the great nations of antiquity are the teachers of the world. This is particularly the case in Chaldea. All right, in Ireland, in ancient Ireland, in the cosmogony of Chaldea, they are called Oannes. The Oannes came into the Persian Gulf in boats. By day, they gave instruction in the arts and sciences and retired by night. It was not a casual visit paid to the Persian Gulf. They made repeated visits, and so important must have been the influence they exerted on the inhabitants of the valley of the Euphrates that the most beautiful temple in Assyria carries their name. They performed the same offices in many other lands of the old continent, in Egypt, in Syria, in Gaul, and in Ireland. All right, Chaldea, it's all the same place. One is at liberty to suspect that there must be some mistake in the identification of the Oannes with Mexico as the harbor whence they swam, but it is much in favor of the hypothesis that the name Oannes is the same as Eon, Ioannis, Eon of this chapter, which is again America. The tracing of the myths of the dragon and his wife as illustrative of ancient Mexico and its inhabitants is well sustained by the descriptions given by the Spaniards of the state of the country and its institutions, the monstrosity and cruelty which it embodied or is embodied by the great red dragon has its counterpart in the bloody practices of the Mexican priests, while on the other hand, the highly favorable features appertaining to the Oannes as teachers of the arts and sciences has its counterpart likewise in the description given of the mercantile, artistic, and social condition of the province. The repulsive side of this subject has received sufficient notice. The beautiful reverse claims a few extracts. The Mexicans, said Clavigero, could boast of many inventions worthy of immortalizing their name, such as besides those of casting metals and mosaic works of feathers and shells, the art of making paper, those of dyeing with indelible colors, spinning and weaving the finest hairs of the rabbits and hares, making razors of a stone called itzli, which they manufactured with such expedition that in an hour an artist could finish more than 100, making beautiful looking glasses of this stone set with gold, the cutting and polishing of gems, breeding of the conch shell, etc. Add to this the well established fact and the science of astronomy had its birth and most correct development in Mexico. All right, the science of astronomy. We're talking about in the world, guys. Had its birth in Mexico. As to the art of painting, it is only necessary to look at the great work of Anglio to see that the art must have been fostered in an eminent degree if it were not created in the land. All right? The Oanis had something to carry with them to the Persian Gulf. All this knowledge, so it makes sense. And that's the end of this chapter. We're gonna go ahead and cut it right there so the video doesn't get too long. Hope you guys enjoyed this part of this series and these chapters we read today. Getting very deep with the zodiacs and more deep with certain other things from talking about mythology and proving that America's the true old world. It's written in the ancient accounts, and this is what this author is showing in this research he did with this book. Hope you guys enjoyed again. Thanks for taking the time to tune in. I appreciate that always. Shout out to all the Patreon supporters. If you want to support me, you can go on to my Patreon page. Check me out right there. I have a lot of books and exclusive videos. Also, you can join my channel membership, become a member of the channel if you like to support me that way. Get a couple perks, all right, and exclusive videos as well. My lives and private, more personal videos for my members. So, only if you're willing and able. No worries if you can. I'm gonna still do what I do either way, but I got much love for those who support. Again, thank you. Um, you guys go ahead and take care. I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.